Welcome to Namely90s, the podcast that takes you back to the time before smartphones, Google, and Y2K. Join your hosts as they relive the pop culture that shaped a generation and the parts that many people wish they could forget. Listen in to the conversation about how the decade defined those who spent their childhood there and how it shaped them as adults. So, turn down the grunge and dial up the internet. Let's get started. It's time for Namely90s.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Andrew, and that's Brandon over there. Website is at namely90s.com. You can find us on Twitter at Namely90s. That's with a 90s. And we're going to just go ahead and jump right in as Brandon sets the stage for what was going on in this month of May 1995.
Imagine, if you will, May 1995. The OJ Simpson trial is going on. The Unabomber had just struck last month. The first ever E3 Electronics Gaming Expo is taking place May 11th through May 13th. And then other things that I found. The film Above Suspicion, starring Christopher Reeve, premieres on HBO. In it, Reeves plays a paralyzed cop who plots the murder of his wife 5 days after the movie first airs. Reeves is seriously injured in a fall while riding on horseback, resulting in him becoming a quadriplegic for the remainder of his life. That was May 21st, followed by May 27th, which also doesn't add up to 5 days difference. And finally, the number one song on Billboard Hot 100 was This Is How We Do It by Montel Jordan. Do you remember that song?
And this is, in fact, how we did it. And I'm a little concerned because my Billboard year-end Hot 100 singles of 95 lists that as song number 10. But this was year-end.
Yeah, this is.
So I
this
think
is
people
for
are really rocking it into May.
This is for the
literal
week of May, or not the.
But that's some longevity, though. I mean, it was number 1 in May, and it was still number 10 in December. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, other things for if we look back at this week in that time, like Blues Travelers, Runaround is climbing the charts. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, interestingly, I've been listening to old Loveline recently, and they've had John Popper from Blues Traveler in there quite a lot, and it's kind of funny to listen to them. They like jam on the saxophone and harmonica, so it's kind of funny you mention that because I'm just kind of in those '90s years thinking about Blues Traveler right now.
I mean, who doesn't think of Blues Traveler when you think back to the '90s? Also,
I mean, I didn't like them back then, but now it's kind of good stuff.
I did. My dad had the album or cassette, I believe it was at the time, and it was like green with a cat with sunglasses on the front. It's kind of weird. Also, I noticed that again this week in 1995, Cotton Eye Joe was at 25 on the top 100 chart.
What an abomination! Seriously.
Right?
I mean, granted, it's stayed relevant for a long time if you're at like a sporting event, but other than that, good lord.
Yeah, Runaround by Blues Traveler was 41. Yeah. Surprisingly, there's a lot of songs I don't recognize on this. Usher.
Oh yeah, well, it makes you realize that like we weren't that old. I mean, what?
6?
I was in the first grade, maybe.
I think we were finishing kindergarten.
Yeah, and I guess the point of that being, like, yes, clearly we were quite young in the 90s, but obviously these things carried on through the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's like, even though I wasn't actively necessarily engaged in a lot of these things, they're all very much were a part of my life during childhood. So it's interesting for sure.
I mean, I think you can look at it like we're actual 90s kids, but like 90s babies probably don't remember, I would say, half of the 90s. Whereas
and I think you could be born in 1980 and still kind of easily identify with this podcast because you were 10 when it was 95. And for us, we started to come into this stuff in the late 90s, and a lot of it was still prevalent in the early 2000s. So it's kind of like that. Anyone that's born from like 80 to 90 can relate to this pretty easily.
If you remember the sound of a dial-up modem and a time when cell phones were a luxury versus something that everyone needed.
And they were also gigantic. That would be the other thing.
Like the Zach Morris style. cell
Oh
phone,
gosh.
brick phone. I think those were
So what
80s
else?
inspired.
Anything else on that list there? Anything
That
happening?
was just to set the stage. I noticed that Die Hard with a Vengeance came out on May 19th, which is the third film in the Die Hard franchise. Um, that was the one with Sam Jackson. I always have trouble because it's like Die Hard, Die Harder, Die Hard with a Vengeance. There's no logical explanation to there's no numbers. I don't.
No.
Wasn't there then
And they've done 5 overall. There was Live Free or Die Hard, and then
the one with Justin Long?
Die Hard for I don't know.
Die Hard for Valentine's Day, I think it was called, or was it Christmas?
Was there?
I'll
Okay.
die home for Christmas. Well, it's he reconnects with his son that was mentioned in Die Hard 4.
Yeah, I forget the name. It's something stupid.
Yeah, I never actually got to see
I'm
that
sure
one.
it's a 5th movie, and it's unusual for a 5th movie in like a sequel or in a franchise to still contain the main actor. Usually, there's like a whole new set of actors by number 4. So kind of unique.
Well, I think in like the new model where it's like bringing back. There's an original trilogy, and then they bring back the original character, like Indiana Jones.
The wiser, older protagonist.
Yeah, that you assume is either going to die by the end of the movie or try to pass on his mantle. But Shia LaBeouf can't be sane enough to run a franchise.
What rubbish! So
also,
go ahead.
Okay, other movies that came out in May of '95: Braveheart, the 3-hour epic starring Mel Gibson, and Casper, the Friendly Ghost, which I'm fairly sure I saw at some point because Christina Ricci.
I don't know if that's had any sequels. Hopefully not.
Definitely had,
unless they were probably made for like direct release sequels.
I think, if I remember correctly, it had one like movie, like theatrical release sequel, and then a lot of direct to home video.
So we weren't very old in 1995.
Thus, Casper.
But that being said, do you have any specific memories of something from 1995 that come to mind?
I honestly don't. I remember kindergarten. I remember first grade, but it's kind of splotchy. What about you?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically a lot of things going on. I don't know. A lot of people, some people can remember stuff till they were like a baby, and that's just nuts because it's a bunch of mundane nonsense. But no, specifically, I remember it was 1995. It would have been, I guess, the 1995 baseball season because I remember being pulled out of class early by my dad and going to a playoff game for the Seattle Mariners in the old Kingdome. And that was their sort of historic only run ever close to the, I almost said Super Bowl, the World Series, which is something that really doesn't ever happen here in Seattle. And I just remember that specific memory of like leaving early, getting in the car, driving to Seattle in a 1989 Honda Civic, and going to sit in like the 300 nosebleed section of the Kingdome to watch some baseball.
You got to go to that?
It was just kind of like one of those really specific memories.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the game where it was. I think they secured the playoffs, or not? They secured the pennant for the AL West,
the AL division. Yeah, they think they beat the Yankees.
Yes, yeah. That's the one that ended in a dog pile at home plate on Griffey.
Yeah, that famous the double.
Yeah, I remember being at my grandmother's because my parents got tickets to that and went without me.
I don't think I was at that game. It was one of the New York games, I'm pretty sure. But the interesting thing in looking back at that time that was interesting is I didn't realize that season started right after like a 232 day player strike, which ended right in April. So it was like the season that almost didn't happen, and then it became one of the coolest seasons for the Mariners, and ended up being a apparently lasting childhood memory. And now we are on our second non-baseball season, although I think there was another strike since. But kind of interesting. But that's my specific memory.
Yeah, and a 2-decade rebuilding for the Seattle Mariners.
Oh goodness!
It's
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
apparently
we
they're
did
going to
go
start
to.
playing again in July. Did you know that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I didn't, because I just saw that most television is canceled or postponed debuting the fall season until January of 2021. So
Yeah, they
I,
came up with like a July 80 game season. I don't know if they're playing in Arizona or in front of people, but yeah, apparently it's coming back. So
huh,
we'll see how it goes.
that's cool. Also, I would be remiss to not mention that we also made the playoffs in 1997, and I believe 2001 when the Mariners set the all-time win record at 116, and then immediately lost the
Immediately
playoffs.
choked out of the playoffs. That's
Yeah,
what it's like to be a sports team in the Pacific Northwest.
yeah,
So,
except for the
um,
Seahawks, kind of.
so what else about this that those things in the 90s? So we've got you said the
Uh,
Unabomber.
mhm. Well, I mean, that was in April, if you remember. I think the Unabomber was arraigned in or caught in May. I don't remember. I thought something interesting that I was looking up. The last episode of Full House. Do you remember Full House? Did you watch Full House?
I unfortunately do. Yes.
Yeah, aired on May 23rd, 1995, which I think is
Wow.
interesting because I just saw an advertisement for Fuller House, who just released their trailer for their final, I think, half of their final season on
It's about to
Netflix.
be an emptier house, thank goodness.
I, I will admit, I think I watched like the first 4 seasons of Fuller House because I was nostalgic for a time of Full House.
Is
But
it because all of the characters got into colleges they shouldn't have been able to academically, but were able to because their parents greased the palms of the officials?
I believe. See, I have not watched it since Aunt Becky got arrested for
Oh,
forging
Becky.
photos of her daughter on a water polo team.
It's like Aunt Becky gets an ankle bracelet. That's going to be the next,
I mean,
the ankle monitor.
yeah. I mean, do you think she was released so they could record those final episodes of Fuller House?
Yeah, and there's no one gets any special treatment in Hollywood, that's for sure.
Huh.
No, it's funny you should mention the Unabomber because it brought back another memory, which I don't think was from 1995 specifically,
Mm.
but we would go to Montana a lot. My mom was from there, and so we would do a lot of road trips from Seattle to eastern Montana, which is a good 15, 18 hours. And I remember kind of just wandering through Montana on this back road, going through a town, and my parents go, "Hey, guess what, guys? This is the town where the Unabomber was caught and where he had his cabin." And I'm like, what a bizarre factoid to
Wow.
share with your young age kids. Like, remember that guy who blew a bunch of people up?
We should go rent that
Yeah.
cabin.
So, but apparently, like some Montana museum had tried to or did acquire the cabin from some museum in DC that closed down. So I just think it's kind of interesting. It was Lincoln, Montana. He didn't live in Lincoln directly. He was off on some, dirt road. But I just like that that's the piece of trivia that my parents had for us as kids.
Wow, that's interesting. The that's what stuck out to you to your or from your family vacations to Montana.
Yes.
Um,
I guess, yeah. So, and then you mentioned the OJ Simpson thing, which I
mhm.
believe he was found not guilty in the year of 1995.
Yes, that was. But the trial lasted from the January through August, I think, or because if I remember correctly, he was cleared of the criminal case, but there's like the um
The civil
civil
suit
case.
or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Thank you.
So, I know back at that time it was pretty controversial. Some people really were on the side of guilty. Some were really on the side of not guilty,
Mhm.
obviously.
But now
Um,
it's all now everyone just is like he killed her, right?
yeah, but I think, whether you were on his side or not, or felt that he was guilty or not back then, and obviously we didn't have an opinion at that time, I do feel like
Yep.
it kind of showed everyone the convoluted nature and complexity of the legal system where it's not always the truth that prevails. And so you wonder a little bit if that contributed to some, distrust of the legal system or political system, to sort of reinforce these ideas, certain people resisting some of that and I don't know. It just seems like an interesting thing that could have affected that.
That is a topic I absolutely do not want to touch, just given the whole. I mean, just the fact that it's tied to the early '90s brutality of police against
Oh,
black
sure.
people, and
I just think what it's showing is there was just the legal system is just really messy.
yeah,
That's my point. It's really hard to navigate, and you end up with these situations where some people think one thing and other people think another, and it's really hard to get to the actual truth. We don't actually know.
right. That's fair. I mean, I saw a photo of a Pikachu protesting with an
Oh my gosh.
AR-15 this morning. So,
It's a strange time we live in.
yeah, yeah, it is definitely a strange time in which we live.
Okay, so I forgot the rest of the things.
Uh,
Did you have?
I have one more thing that I found notable about May of 1995.
All right, go for it.
The Sega Saturn was released on May 11th, which coincides with the beginning of E3, the first E3, which was cool back then because it was like we didn't have the internet. I think conventions, with the advent of the internet, conventions for like new releases of technology and stuff, that's kind of gone by the wayside. Well, at least video games, because the people that like video games now were probably the people that liked video games back then. Just they suck more.
But in the same vein, that you mentioned sort of technology, video games, consoles, that kind of thing. 95 was a pretty big year. I mean, we had the release of Windows 95. JavaScript was introduced and deployed and is still used widely, 25 years later? So JavaScript, eBay was started, and obviously that's really grown. The DVD format was announced and is already clearly died, but you can still get them. They're just not really the standard anymore. So a lot of really interesting things that shifted the landscape in the technology world in 1995.
You say that,
it's
but
a big year.
Specifically May 1995. Do you remember the Sega Saturn? I remember it existed.
I never had the Sega.
Yeah,
my cousins always had the Sega stuff. We never had that.
My cousins too. Isn't that weird? Like my cousin had a Game Gear. I had a Game Boy. Like when we would go on family vacations together, we would always swap because.
What do you think that said about the family? Was it like they just were really alternative, didn't want to be like mainstream, or
no? Well, what? They also had a Nintendo.
Why
64.
would someone choose a Sega over Nintendo? Oh, they did.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
The Sega was Sonic's platform, and I mean, if you look at Sony versus Microsoft right now, I think at that point in time, Nintendo versus Sega was the two big console. Like that was the console war.
I think I had a PlayStation. Was the PlayStation 1 out yet?
No. It was. I think it might have come out in 95. I know it was out by 97. The PlayStation started as an add-on to the Super Nintendo, and then Sony was like, you know what? Let's just make it our own console. And
PlayStation 1994 December.
Yeah.
So just almost 95.
Yeah. So the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn both ran on disk drives versus the Super Nintendo. I think the Nintendo 64 wasn't out at that point. But they both still used cartridges as a layover from the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And
the Nintendo the cartridges are kind of smart because it's like, it's like a solid state thing, so they tend to be more reliable where the disc can get scratched easily. So, but I think just once things advanced, those had limitations that they couldn't deal with anymore.
Oh yeah, well that and they're expensive to make.
Yeah.
Or especially at the time, they were expensive to make versus a CD, which was cheaper.
Right, exactly. Now it's like you can just download it or you can buy the disc, but it's just kind of interesting how that's changed.
So I have a list of Sega Saturn games that I was scrolling through, and I don't think I recognize anything other than Sonic R and Sonic Jam. You know who had a Sega Saturn? Pat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is it any wonder that kind of died out? Like, I feel like it has Sonic, but it just didn't have a lot of the other more mainstream games. I mean, what do you think is the reason that Sega just sort of fell by the wayside and
Well,
didn't have as much of a market
they
share.
made it to the Dreamcast, but I think they didn't have much support outside of, because a lot of the game,
People's cousins.
yeah, yes, everyone's cousin had a Dreamcast. Well, Sega had their own like set of software, which like the Virtua series, there was Virtua Cop, Virtua Fighter. I know I had Virtua Fighter on the PC for some reason. But it was just like Sonic was their big property that worked. Um, they didn't have a lot of third party support from what I can tell from this list of Sega Saturn games. And then on the Dreamcast, that got worse because, I mean, do you remember the Dreamcast? Pat had a Dreamcast too, but
Vaguely, yeah. I feel like there was a time where like the Dreamcast people were really intense, and then it just died out.
right. It's I yeah. Dreamcast. There's hardcore Dreamcast people out there, and I never understood it. There was that they had a game where there was like a fish in an aquarium that you talked to through a
Oh boy.
controller or something, but it was like a creepy. There's a creepy Japanese man's face as the head of the fish. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like the thing that nightmares are made out of. So,
Yep. And I've had a few nightmares from video games.
So, I guess, do you have anything else, other topics that you had for this particular time period to cover?
No, that's everything I had for May of 1995.
Okay.
But
Any
if
just
it was
general
the
95 things, or
yeah, I mean it would have been the end of kindergarten for us. Which were we in the same class? I think we were in the same class.
oh boy, it's so hard to say. I don't remember.
I'm sure someone will find photos from our yearbooks and post them online later.
No thanks.
Yeah. I think we were in the same kindergarten class, if I remember correctly. Where I encountered for the first time someone with my same name, which I didn't realize was a thing that can happen. I thought my first name was unique to me. The other class, there was another Brandon. Yeah. And he was like,
"You're such a snowflake."
I was
Oh,
named
wait, no.
Yeah. No, Brandon was actually one of the more popular names from 1989 when I was born.
So it was Ashley and Jessica.
Yep.
Ashley and Jessica. My goodness,
So
everyone is named that.
Yep. But I remember encountering him, and I was like, "Well, when were you named Brandon?" And like, when was he born? Because I was like, if I was born first, then the name is mine, and then he was born before me, and my logic was like, I don't. Maybe I'm the fake Brandon. So and yeah. And then
so I came up with a couple other things.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Continue.
No, go ahead.
I think I slightly misinterpreted our pre-show meeting as far as topics specifically relating to May 95. So I have some things outside of May, but I prepped them.
120 episodes.
I just, in the process of
20 episodes.
Well, yes, but in the process of looking, I later found out, interestingly, just a couple of tidbits here. The in 1995, I was looking at the top TV shows, and obviously NBC was just killing it back then. They had ER, Seinfeld, and Friends, and they had some other fourth show I didn't really care about.
I think Friends was in its sophomore season.
Number one. Yeah, they just owned number one.
When have they not?
And then lately. I don't know. I don't like TV anymore. Home Improvement was like a big thing back then on ABC. Fox had no shows in the top 30 until 1996 when The X-Files hit number 21, which was in its fourth season at that time. That's kind of crazy.
It was
to
a
me.
rough
Like
start.
An immediate hit.
No.
Well, there you go.
Do you remember
Fox
the episode?
Really didn't come on the scene until then.
Yeah. Do you remember? Well, The Simpsons is what gave Fox popularity and any.
Sure. Yeah.
Which started as a single show in '89. I think
it was a young network for sure.
Yeah, it was the edgy network, and now they're owned by Disney, which owns ABC. Congratulations.
So yeah, it's just an interesting. I just was surprised to see that they had no shows in the top 30 at that time.
I mean, can
Didn't expect that.
you name a Fox show other than the X-Files or the Simpsons from?
Not back then, no.
Yeah.
God, no.
I think
So
yeah.
I think that was it. Another tidbit I learned. As you know, I've been on this Loveline bent lately, listening to the old ones. 1995, Adam Carolla joins Loveline along Dr. Drew and Ricky Rackman, some bad like MTV VJ. Ugh, I hate that term.
Which I'm sure we'll dive into
down
the line.
MTV is not going to escape our crosshairs.
Yeah,
so,
if you want us to do an episode on MTV VJs, wow.
Yeah,
Carson
Carson Daly.
Let us know.
And then the only other thing I had to mention, just because it's such a notable for 1995, we talked about some movies.
Was Carson Daly a VJ or? I thought he just hosted TRL.
TRL. I don't know. Maybe you're right. But it's Carson Daly. Does that really? I don't know. He's rubbish. Toy Story, first ever entirely computer generated film,
which is something I'm sure we'll talk about in depth at a later episode.
Very true. So I think that's, again, I obviously botched the planning for the show, but I still think we covered a good,
portion of time.
Gamut of topics.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it'll probably be 10 episodes before we touch on 1995 again. And that's been our edition of Namely90s this week. I'm Brandon. That's Andrew. You can find us on Twitter at Namely90s with a 90 and S, or on our personal accounts at bschwitty and at NamelyAndrew, and tell us what you want us to talk about on future episodes, or you could also contact us on our website at namely90s.com. And please, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, TuneIn, and wherever you get your podcasts at. Share it with your friends. Tell them about it if you like this episode. Tell us what we should do to improve it for future episodes. Anyways, that's been Namely90s, and we'll catch you next time.